I was only 23 years old. I had finally graduated from college, landed an internship, and felt like my hard work was finally paying off. After years of studying, working part-time at a cafe, and earning a scholarship to reduce my tuition costs, I thought I was starting my adult life on the right foot. Then everything changed with one email. It was a message from my bank. At first, I assumed it was just another routine notification, but when I opened it, I froze. According to the statement, I owed $170,000. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. My entire college education wasn't even supposed to cost that much. With my scholarship, part-time job, and savings, I expected to have some student debt, but nothing close to $170,000. I even wondered if the bank had accidentally added an extra zero. Panicking, I immediately called my parents. My mom answered, and when I explained what the bank had sent me, she casually told me it was probably a mistake and said we'd sort it out later. But I knew something was wrong. I kept pressing her, asking why the loan was so high. After a long, uncomfortable silence, she admitted they had taken out a loan in my name for my college expenses. Then she confessed they had borrowed the full amount just in case my scholarship didn't cover everything. I was stunned. My scholarship had already covered a large portion of my tuition, and I had worked hard to pay for the rest myself. There was no reason to borrow anywhere near that much money. So I asked the obvious question, where did the rest of the money go? That's when my mom finally admitted that my twin brother, Evan, needed some help too. My mind went blank. Evan hadn't even gone to college. He was busy chasing his dream of becoming a model. Yet my parents had secretly used a loan taken out in ** my name ** to give him money. I was furious and completely betrayed. I demanded to know how much they had given him and why they hadn't taken out a loan in his own name if he needed financial help. Instead of answering, my mom kept avoiding my questions, telling me to calm down and insisting that we'd figure it out. Figure it out? I was the one stuck with a ** $170,000 debt ** that I had never agreed to, and they wanted to deal with it later as if it were no big deal. I told my mom we needed to have this conversation face to face. She reluctantly agreed. After hanging up, I just sat there in silence, trying to process everything. I had spent years making responsible decisions, believing I was building a secure future. In a single phone call, I discovered my own parents had put me into massive debt without my knowledge, all to support my spoiled golden child brother. I spent the next few days trying to make sense of what had happened. The next few days were a blur. I had no idea what to do. It wasn't like I could magically make ** $170,000 disappear, and I couldn't focus on anything else. Every time I tried to concentrate on work, my mind went right back to that email and the sinking feeling that my life had just been turned upside down. When the weekend finally arrived, I drove to my parents' house to confront them face to face. Part of me still hoped there had been some kind of misunderstanding, but deep down I already knew the truth wasn't going to be any better. The first thing I noticed was how normal everything looked. The house was quiet. My parents were sitting in the living room, and it was as if nothing had happened. Meanwhile, I had a ** $170,000 debt ** hanging over my head. I sat down and skipped the small talk. I need to know what's going on with this loan, I said, trying to keep my voice calm. My dad let out a long sigh before saying they had only been trying to do what was best for both me and my twin brother, Evan. According to him, they never intended for things to end up like this. That wasn't enough for me. I kept pressing them for answers. I wanted to know exactly how much they had borrowed, how much they had given to Evan, and why they had never told me any of this in the first place. My dad became defensive, insisting they had always tried to treat both of us equally. It didn't feel equal to me. After what felt like hours of arguing, they finally admitted the truth. They had given ** $80,000 of the loan money to Evan to help him pursue his career. I couldn't believe it. Evan hadn't even gone to college, yet I was the one left responsible for a debt that was more than twice what I actually needed for school. I asked why they hadn't simply taken out a loan in Evan's name. They came up with excuse after excuse. His grades weren't good enough. They didn't have enough assets to use as collateral. There was always another reason. By that point, I was furious. Still, I knew yelling wasn't going to solve anything. So I looked them both in the eye and said, I'll pay back the part of the loan that actually paid for my education, but I'm not paying a single dollar for Evan. If he spent $$80,000, that's his responsibility, not mine. My parents didn't like hearing that. My mom immediately accused me of being selfish. She said it was my responsibility to help the family. Selfish? I was the one who had been saddled with a massive debt without my knowledge or permission because they chose to bail out Evan. I told them they had two choices. Either they found a way to repay the $$80,000, or Evan did. I wasn't going to carry that burden for either of them. When I left their house, I was even angrier than when I arrived. It felt like my entire world had been turned upside down, and I had no idea what my next move should be. One thing was certain. I wasn't going to let them guilt-trip me into paying a debt that wasn't mine. Back at my apartment, I still couldn't shake the frustration. No matter how hard I tried to do everything the right way, I kept ending up paying for someone else's choices. But I wasn't ready to give up. After cooling down, I realized I needed to stop arguing with emotions and start dealing with facts. Over the next couple of days, I researched everything I could about student loans, how they worked, what my legal rights were, and what options I had. It was overwhelming, but one thing became clear. My parents had borrowed far more money than was necessary, and they had done it without making sure I truly understood what I was signing. Armed with that information, I decided to visit them again. This time, I had a plan. I wasn't going to let them dodge my questions or talk in circles. I needed clear answers, and I needed them to understand that I wasn't their personal ATM. I refused to spend years paying off a debt that I had never benefited from. When I arrived at their house again, everything looked just as normal as before. That only made me even more frustrated. It was like they were living in a world where nothing had happened, while my future was falling apart. While I was losing sleep over my financial future, my parents were acting like nothing had happened. When I walked into their house, they were sitting in the living room watching TV as if everything was perfectly normal. I took a deep breath, sat down across from them, and tried to stay calm. All right, we need to talk. They both looked at me like they already knew what was coming. My dad muted the TV, and my mom let out a long sigh, almost like I was the one causing them an inconvenience. I laid everything out. I explained what I had learned about the loan, how much I should actually owe for my education, and how the extra $$80,000 they borrowed had nothing to do with my college expenses. I could see my mom's expression hardening, while my dad sat there with his arms crossed, waiting for me to finish. Then I asked the question they had been avoiding. If Evan needed money so badly, why didn't you take out a loan in his name? My dad finally spoke. You have to understand, he said. Your brother wasn't really in a position to qualify for a loan. His grades weren't good, and we didn't want him starting his adult life with that kind of burden. I stared at him in disbelief. So instead, you decided to put that burden on me. I struggled to keep my voice under control. I worked my ass off to get into college. I earned a scholarship. I did everything right, and now I'm expected to pay for Evan's career. My dad immediately became defensive. He insisted they had always tried to support both of us equally and never meant for things to end up this way. But it didn't feel equal. It felt like they were using me to clean up Evan's mess. I looked them both in the eye and said, I'm not paying back the $$80,000 you gave him. The color drained from my mom's face, and tears filled her eyes. Normally, that would have made me feel guilty. This time, it didn't. I knew exactly what she was doing. She was trying to make me feel selfish for refusing to sacrifice myself for the family. I wasn't falling for it anymore. She started giving the familiar speech about family, saying they only wanted Evan to have the same chance to succeed that I had. I fired back. How is giving Evan $$80,000 to spend on whatever he wanted the same as me using money to earn a college degree? She didn't have an answer. Instead, she cried even harder. My dad stepped in to defend her, saying I was being too harsh and that I didn't understand the pressure they had been under. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. What about the pressure I'm under? I asked. I'm the one who's expected to spend years paying off a debt that isn't mine. They still didn't seem to understand. We argued for what felt like hours. They kept making excuses for what they had done, and I kept pointing out why those excuses didn't justify putting me $$80,000 deeper in debt. I was getting more frustrated by the minute, but I forced myself to stay calm. Finally, I changed my approach. If you don't repay that $$80,000, I'll have to take legal action. The room went silent. My dad's eyes widened. My mom looked like she was about to fall apart. They immediately begged me not to do anything that drastic, insisting it would tear the family apart. I was done letting them manipulate me with guilt. I don't want this, I said, but you either find a way to repay that money or I'll do whatever I have to do to protect myself. I'm not going to let this debt ruin my future because you chose Evan over me. Through her tears, my mom promised they'd try to come up with a solution. I could tell she was mostly saying it to calm me down. For the first time, though, my dad didn't argue. He just sat there in silence. I think he finally realized I meant every word. I stood up and headed for the door. As I walked outside, my mom called after me. Are you really going to go through with this? I turned around one last time. If that's what it takes, I said, then yes. Then I got in my car and drove away without looking back. As I drove home, I felt a mix of emotions. I was angry, of course, but underneath all that anger was sadness. I never wanted things to reach this point. They are my parents, and the last thing I ever imagined was threatening legal action against them. But what choice did they leave me? They had put me in an impossible situation, and now I had to find a way out of it. It hurt, but I knew I had to do what was right for me. By the time I got back to my apartment, I was completely drained. I collapsed onto the couch and stared at the ceiling, trying to make sense of everything that had happened. I knew this wasn't going to end anytime soon. There was going to be a long fight ahead, and I had no idea how it would turn out. Still, I knew I couldn't back down. My mind started racing through everything I needed to do next: how to protect myself legally, how to keep myself afloat financially, and how I was going to deal with this enormous debt hanging over my future. More than anything, I was just exhausted. I knew this wasn't going to be easy, but I never imagined it would be this difficult. Lying there, I realized something. This wasn't the end of the story. It was only the beginning. There was a long road ahead, and if I wanted to come out the other side, I would have to stay strong. At least now I finally understood what I was up against, and no matter what happened next, I wasn't backing down. After confronting my parents, I realized I couldn't sit around waiting for them to magically fix the mess they had created. If this whole situation had taught me anything, it was that taking responsibility wasn't exactly their strong suit. So I decided to take matters into my own hands. I needed to find out exactly what had happened with this loan. There was no way I was going to let $$80,000 of debt, money that had nothing to do with my education and had apparently gone toward funding Evan's lifestyle, destroy my future. The first thing I did was gather every piece of paperwork I could find. It wasn't exciting, but I was desperate. I dug through loan agreements, bank statements, tuition records, emails, anything that might help me understand what had happened. Honestly, I wasn't even sure what I was looking for. I just knew that the more information I had, the better. As I compared everything, I started noticing major inconsistencies. The tuition bills from my college showed one set of numbers, while the loan documents showed something completely different. The gap wasn't small. It was obvious that my parents had borrowed far more money than my education actually cost, and they had done it without ever telling me. Then I found something that made my stomach drop. Back when I turned 18, I had signed paperwork giving my parents access to my bank account. At the time, I didn't think twice about it. I was just a kid trying to figure out adulthood. I didn't understand student loans, banking, or financial paperwork. When my parents told me to sign the documents so they could help manage my money while I was in college, I trusted them completely. Looking back, that was one of the biggest mistakes I'd ever made. As I reviewed the documents, it became painfully clear that they had used that access to take out the extra $$80,000. They never asked for my permission. They simply did it. The more I uncovered, the more it felt like I had been manipulated. They knew I didn't fully understand what I was signing, and they took advantage of that trust to do what they wanted. Every new document made me angrier. But more than anger, I felt betrayed. These were the people who were supposed to protect me, guide me, and look out for my future. Instead, they had left me buried under a mountain of debt that I never agreed to. Even so, I refused to give up. If anything, discovering the truth only strengthened my determination to get out of this mess. I spent hours researching online, trying to learn whether there was any legal way to challenge what they had done or reverse part of the loan. I knew it was probably a long shot, but I had to try. Here's your passage rewritten into a more natural, human storytelling style while keeping *** all the important details and emotions *** intact. I expanded a few moments to make the story flow better without leaving out any key information. As I kept researching, I discovered that it was sometimes possible to challenge unauthorized financial transactions. The problem was that the process was complicated, and there were strict deadlines for filing a complaint. I had no idea whether too much time had already passed, but I wasn't ready to give up. I kept digging, hoping I'd find something that could help. The more I learned, the more I started thinking about Evan. While I was drowning in debt and scrambling to save my future, he had been living his life without a care in the world. I loved him because he was my brother, but I was tired of always cleaning up after him. For once, he needed to take responsibility for his own actions. I decided it was time to confront him directly. I was done letting my parents shield him from the consequences. I wanted to know exactly what happened to the money, and whether there was even the slightest chance he'd step up and help pay it back. I knew it was a long shot. Evan had never been the responsible one, but I had to try. One evening, I decided to wait for him. He usually didn't get home until after midnight, so I made myself a cup of coffee and sat alone in the kitchen. My parents had already gone to bed, making it the perfect opportunity to talk to him without anyone interrupting. When I finally heard his car pull into the driveway, my heart started pounding. I had no idea how this conversation was going to end, but I was ready to face it. He walked inside, and instead of confronting him immediately, I tried to keep things casual. I offered him some coffee, and we talked about random things, work, life, everyday stuff. I wanted to ease into the conversation instead of blindsiding him. He didn't seem suspicious at all. That made sense. Evan had always avoided conflict, so he probably assumed it was just a normal late-night chat. Eventually, I brought up the loan. I asked if he had any idea how much trouble I was in because of the money Mom and Dad had given him. He looked genuinely confused. "What are you talking about?" His reaction only made me more frustrated. So I explained everything. I told him about the $170,000 loan, how $80,000 of it had been taken out for him, and how I was the one legally responsible for paying it back. He just sat there, looking more confused by the second. Finally, he said, "What money?" I didn't get $80,000. That was the moment I snapped. I raised my voice and explained that our parents had borrowed the money in my name and handed it over to him. After a long pause, his expression changed. "Oh, that. I thought they were just giving me money to help me out." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. He thought $80,000 was just some money. I asked him where it had all gone. He shrugged. "I don't know. I guess I spent it on trips, going out with friends, the usual." The usual? I was speechless. While I had been working part-time, earning scholarships, and carefully managing every dollar just to get through college, he had burned through $80,000 on vacations, nights out, and partying. And now I was expected to pay for it. I was furious. I told him he needed to pay the money back because it was his responsibility. Instead of showing even a little remorse, he looked at me like I was the unreasonable one. "It's not my fault Mom and Dad gave me the money," he said. "I didn't ask for it." That was when everything became crystal clear. He didn't feel guilty. He wasn't sorry. He didn't care that I was the one whose future had been put at risk. As far as he was concerned, it wasn't his problem. I had reached my limit. I told him I wasn't paying a single cent of the $80,000 that had been spent on him. If he refused to take responsibility, I'd have no choice but to pursue legal action to protect myself. He actually laughed. "Good luck with that," he said, as if the whole situation was some kind of joke. That was enough for me. I walked out of the kitchen without saying another word. By the time I got back to my apartment, I was overwhelmed with anger, disappointment, and exhaustion. How had my life turned into this? How had I ended up with parents who thought it was acceptable to use my name for a massive loan, and a brother who couldn't even admit he'd benefited from it? I collapsed onto my bed, completely drained. But no matter how tired I was, I couldn't sleep. The conversation kept replaying in my mind over and over. I kept wondering what my next move should be and how I was ever going to get out of this situation. One thing, however, had become perfectly clear. I was done playing nice. If my family thought they could keep walking all over me without consequences, they were about to find out how wrong they were. I wasn't backing down. I wasn't giving up. This fight was only just beginning. After the disaster of that conversation with Evan, I returned to my apartment knowing the next step would have to be even bigger. After everything that happened with Evan, I went back to my apartment hoping I could finally calm down. Instead, I just sat there feeling like I'd been punched in the gut. No matter how hard I tried to make sense of everything, the situation only seemed to get worse. My parents refused to accept responsibility. Evan acted like none of this was his problem. Meanwhile, I was the one left carrying $170,000 debt that never should have existed in the first place. For the first time in my life, I truly felt alone. It was like I was fighting a battle that no one else even acknowledged, and it was exhausting. Every conversation ended the same way, with excuses, denial, or someone trying to make me feel guilty for standing up for myself. But there was one thing I knew about myself. I wasn't the kind of person who would just roll over and let people take advantage of me. If my family honestly believed I was going to quietly spend years paying off $170,000 without putting up a fight, they had badly underestimated me. I realized I couldn't keep living in a constant state of reacting to whatever they did next. I needed to take control of the situation, set firm boundaries, and make it clear that I wasn't going to be manipulated anymore. Even so, I decided to give my parents one final opportunity to make things right. This would be their last chance. I was done listening to excuses. I was done being guilt-tripped. I was done pretending this could all be fixed with another empty promise. Either they found a way to correct what they had done, or I would be forced to take the next step. It was a risk, but at that point I felt like I had nothing left to lose. I called my parents and told them I was coming over. My mom answered the phone, and I could immediately hear the hesitation in her voice. She knew something was wrong, but I didn't explain anything. "We need to talk," I said. "I'll be there soon." Then I hung up. The drive to their house felt longer than usual. I kept replaying every conversation we'd already had, wondering if this one would be any different. Part of me hoped they'd finally admit what they'd done and offer a real solution. Another part of me already knew they probably wouldn't. When I walked through the front door, it was the exact same scene as before. They were sitting together in the living room watching television as if nothing had happened. Meanwhile, I hadn't slept properly in days because I couldn't stop thinking about the debt hanging over my future. I sat down across from them and took a deep breath. I knew if I walked in yelling, they'd immediately stop listening, so I forced myself to stay calm. "I want to explain this one last time," I said. I carefully laid out everything I'd discovered. I explained exactly how much my education had actually cost, how much should have been borrowed, and how the extra $80,000 had nothing to do with my college expenses. I reminded them that the money had been taken using my financial information and transferred for Evan's benefit without my informed consent. As expected, my mom became emotional almost immediately. She started saying they had never intended for things to get this bad. She insisted they were only trying to help Evan, and that they honestly believed I would be able to handle the debt. I'd heard those explanations before. They didn't make anything better. I gently interrupted her. "This isn't about helping Evan anymore," I said. "This is about the fact that you put me into a financial nightmare without telling me, and now you're expecting me to clean up the mess." The room fell quiet. Then I said what I'd come there to say. "If you don't repay the $$80,000 that was taken for Evan, I'll have to take legal action." Neither of them spoke. I continued. "I've spent days researching this. I understand far more about what happened than I did before. Taking out far more money than my education required, using my financial access to move those funds, and handling everything without properly informing me are serious issues. If this can't be resolved privately, I'll have to protect myself through legal channels." The room became completely silent. My mom's face turned pale. This time, it wasn't just sadness I saw. It was panic. For the first time since this nightmare began, I think she realized I wasn't bluffing. My dad stared at me without saying a word. He was trying to figure out whether I was serious. I was. After several long seconds, he finally spoke. "There has to be another way," he said quietly. "Can we work this out without getting lawyers involved?" Normally, I would have been willing to negotiate. Not anymore. I looked directly at him. "This isn't my mess," I said. "You created it. You need to fix it. I'm not sacrificing my future because you decided to gamble on Evan." My mom started crying again. She said they didn't have the money. She said they were already struggling financially and that taking this to court would destroy the family. For a brief moment, I almost felt guilty. Then I remembered the sleepless nights, the panic attacks, the fear of starting my adult life buried under debt I never agreed to. I remembered how every conversation had been filled with excuses instead of accountability. The guilt disappeared. I stayed firm. "I'm giving you 2 weeks," I told them. "Come up with a real plan to repay the $$80,000. If nothing changes by then, I'll move forward with legal action." I paused to let my words sink in. No more delays. No more excuses. I'm tired of being the only person in this family who's expected to sacrifice everything. My dad's expression changed. His frustration quickly turned into anger. "So you're really willing to tear this family apart over money?" he asked. I couldn't believe he still saw it that way. I took a slow breath before answering. "No," I said. "This family started falling apart the moment you decided my future was worth sacrificing without even asking me." My dad tried one last time to make me feel guilty. He said I was tearing the family apart over money, but I refused to let him turn this around on me. "No," I said firmly. "You put me in this position. I'm just doing what I have to do to protect myself." The conversation went back and forth for a while after that. They kept trying to justify what they had done, and I kept reminding them that none of this should have been my responsibility in the first place. I wasn't asking them for a favor. I was asking them to fix the mess they had created. Eventually, my dad let out a frustrated sigh and said they'd see what they could do. It wasn't an apology. It wasn't a promise. It was the closest thing to an answer I was going to get. He was clearly angry, and my mom was still crying. Normally, seeing my mom like that would have broken my heart, but I didn't have the emotional energy to comfort her anymore. That might sound harsh, but I had reached my limit. For weeks, I'd been carrying the weight of panic, betrayal, and uncertainty while they kept making excuses. This time, I chose myself. I left their house emotionally exhausted, but there was also a small sense of relief. I'd given them every opportunity to make things right. If they refused, then whatever happened next would be because of their choices, not mine. Over the next several days, I waited for my phone to ring. Every time it buzzed, I hoped it would be one of my parents telling me they'd found a solution. Instead, all I received were messages from my mom. She kept asking me to reconsider. She told me how difficult this was for them, how stressed they were, and how worried she was that our family would never recover from this. I understood that she was scared, but I couldn't ignore what had happened just because they were finally feeling the consequences. Each time she texted, my answer stayed the same. "You have 2 weeks. Nothing more, nothing less." As the deadline got closer, I started preparing for the possibility that they wouldn't do anything at all. I organized every piece of evidence I had collected. I printed copies of bank statements, loan agreements, tuition records, emails, and every document that showed the difference between what my education actually cost and the amount borrowed in my name. I wanted everything organized in case I needed it in court. I also scheduled a consultation with a lawyer. Walking into that office felt surreal. Never in my life had I imagined I'd be discussing legal action against my own parents. The lawyer carefully reviewed the documents, asked questions about how the loans had been handled, and explained what my options might be. Nothing was guaranteed, but hearing that I potentially had legal grounds to challenge what had happened gave me a little hope. At least I wasn't imagining things. My concerns were real. Throughout all of this, my friends and my girlfriend stood by me. They checked in constantly, made sure I was eating, and reminded me to take breaks from obsessing over paperwork. Still, almost everyone asked me the same question. Are you sure you want to do this? It was a fair question. Who actually wants to sue their own parents? I didn't. Not for a second. But I also knew that if I stayed quiet, I'd spend years, maybe decades, paying for a debt that never should have been mine. So every time someone asked, I gave the same answer. I don't have a choice. Eventually, the 2-week deadline arrived. I hadn't received a single real update from my parents. No repayment plan. No proposal. No accountability. Nothing. Part of me wondered if they were simply hoping I'd lose my nerve and give up. But they still didn't understand me. I'd come too far to back down now. That afternoon, I sent my mom one final text. I reminded her that the deadline had arrived and told her that if I didn't hear from them before the end of the day, I'd begin the legal process the following morning. After sending the message, I spent the rest of the evening pacing around my apartment. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, realizing I was about to cross a line that could never be undone. If I filed that lawsuit, there was a good chance my relationship with my parents would never recover. The thought hurt. I felt angry. I felt sad. I was scared. But underneath all of those emotions was something unexpected. Relief. I'd done everything I reasonably could. I'd listened. I'd explained. I'd negotiated. I'd given them multiple chances. Whatever happened next wasn't because I had rushed into it. It was because they had left me no other option. The following morning, my phone buzzed. It was a text from my mom. The message was short. Asterisk, we're working on getting the money together. Please don't do anything yet. We'll talk soon. Asterisk, it wasn't the resolution I'd been hoping for. There were no details. No timeline. No actual plan. But for the first time since all of this began, it sounded like they finally understood I wasn't bluffing. I replied a few minutes later. You have one more week to give me a concrete plan. If you do, I'll hold off on filing. If you're only trying to delay this, I won't hesitate to move forward. After sending the message, there was nothing left for me to do except wait. I hoped they would finally take responsibility and do the right thing. At the same time, I wasn't naive enough to expect a miracle. Either way, I was ready. This wasn't over yet. At least now I knew I wasn't completely powerless anymore. Update 1. After that final exchange with my mom, I found myself stuck in a strange kind of limbo. I was waiting to see whether my parents were genuinely trying to fix the situation or simply buying themselves more time. The uncertainty was exhausting. Every morning, I reached for my phone hoping to see a message from them. Every evening, I went to bed disappointed. Several days passed without a single call or text. The silence was driving me crazy. My mind kept wandering to the worst-case scenarios. Were they avoiding me? Were they hoping I'd eventually give up? Or were they actually trying to find a solution? I had no way of knowing. As the days dragged on, I started thinking less about the money and more about what all of this had done to my relationship with my parents. The trust we'd built over my entire life had been shattered. Even if the debt somehow disappeared tomorrow, I wasn't sure our relationship could ever go back to what it had been. Some things, once broken, simply couldn't be put back together the way they were before. Even if my parents somehow fixed the financial mess, I wasn't sure I could ever trust them again. The money was only part of the problem. What hurt the most was realizing the people I'd trusted my entire life had hidden something this huge from me. They had made decisions that affected my future without ever asking for my permission. That kind of betrayal isn't something you just forget. I spent the next few days trying to stay busy, but my mind never stopped racing. Then, late one night, my phone rang. I was already half asleep when I reached over to check the screen. It was my dad. I answered, expecting maybe he'd finally have some good news. Instead, before I could even say hello, he started yelling. He accused me of tearing the family apart. He called me selfish. He reminded me of everything my parents had ever done for me and asked how I could repay them by threatening legal action. Still half asleep, I sat there listening while he unloaded every guilt trip imaginable. "Do you really want to be the reason your mother ends up in the hospital?" he shouted. "Evan's already struggling, and now you're making things even worse for him." It was the same emotional manipulation I'd heard before, only this time it was louder, harsher, and far more desperate. I let him finish. As angry as I was, I didn't want to lose control. After he finally stopped talking, I took a deep breath. "Dad," I said calmly, "this isn't about tearing the family apart. It's about fairness. You and Mom put me in a situation where I have to protect myself. That's exactly what I'm doing." He refused to hear it. He kept insisting I was overreacting. He said I was creating unnecessary stress and that I should simply trust them to handle everything. Trust them? How could I? They had hidden the loan from me. They had borrowed far more money than I needed. They had used my financial information to help Evan without telling me. And now they were acting as if I was the problem for refusing to accept it. "I've already given you more chances than I should have," I told him. "If you don't come up with the money, I'll have no choice but to move forward." That only made him angrier. Before he could start another argument, I interrupted him. "Dad, this conversation isn't going anywhere. I've made my decision, and I'm not backing down." There was a long silence. Then he hung up. I stared at my phone for several minutes after the call ended. It felt like someone had punched me in the stomach. No matter how difficult the conversation had been, I knew I'd done the right thing. I couldn't spend the rest of my life letting guilt control my decisions. This was my future. If I didn't protect it, nobody else would. The next morning, I woke up to a flood of text messages from my mom. Some of them tried to reason with me. Others were filled with guilt. A few were outright pleas for me to drop everything. She kept saying things like, "We're your parents. We'd never intentionally hurt you." She reminded me that Evan was my brother and needed my support instead of my anger. Reading those messages hurt. A part of me wanted to believe her, but another part remembered everything I'd uncovered over the past few weeks. Every document, every lie, every excuse. I couldn't ignore all of that just because they were finally scared. So I replied with the same answer I'd been giving from the beginning. "I'm still waiting for a plan to repay the money." I reminded her that only a few days remained before my deadline expired. She didn't answer for several hours. When she finally did, nothing had changed. She said they were trying. She said they simply didn't have the money yet. She asked me to be patient. At that point, I wasn't surprised anymore. In fact, I was beginning to wonder if they'd ever intended to repay me at all. Maybe this had been their strategy from the beginning. Delay. Make excuses. Hope I got tired. Hope I felt guilty enough to walk away. But they didn't know me as well as they thought. As the deadline got closer, my anxiety kept growing. Every day I wondered whether I'd actually have to file the lawsuit. Part of me still hoped they'd finally accept responsibility. Another part knew better. Then, on the very last day of the deadline, my phone rang again. This time, it wasn't my parents. It was Evan. I hesitated before answering. Since our last conversation, he'd barely spoken to me. When I picked up, his voice was completely different from my dad's. He wasn't angry. He sounded nervous, almost ashamed. He started by saying he was sorry things had gotten this bad. Then he admitted he'd been thinking about everything I'd told him. He said he finally understood why I was so angry. For the first time since this nightmare began, he actually acknowledged that taking the money had been wrong. "I shouldn't have accepted it," he admitted quietly. Hearing those words caught me off guard. For weeks, all I'd heard were excuses. This was the first time anyone in my family had admitted that what happened wasn't okay. I stayed quiet and let him continue. He told me he hadn't fully understood where the money came from at the time. He said our parents had made it sound like they were simply helping him get started in life. He never stopped to question why they suddenly had tens of thousands of dollars available. Looking back, he admitted he should have asked more questions. He should have realized something wasn't right. He should never have accepted money that wasn't truly theirs to give. It wasn't a complete apology. It didn't erase what had happened. And it certainly didn't solve the $$80,000 problem. But for the first time in weeks, I felt like I was talking to someone who actually understood the damage this had caused. Whether his apology would turn into real action was another question entirely. I wasn't ready to trust anyone's words anymore. From this point on, only actions would matter. Here's your passage rewritten in a more natural, emotional, and human storytelling style while preserving all the important details and expanding the scenes for a smoother, more engaging narrative. Evan took a long breath before speaking again. I should have asked more questions, he admitted quietly. I shouldn't have just accepted the money. Looking back, I know I should have been more responsible. For a moment, I thought maybe this conversation was finally going somewhere. Then he dropped another bombshell. I don't have any way to pay you back. I stayed silent. He explained that his modeling career still wasn't going anywhere. The occasional gigs barely covered his rent and basic expenses. He wasn't making enough money to save anything, let alone repay $$80,000. I can barely take care of myself right now, he said, sounding genuinely defeated. I could hear the frustration in his voice, and part of me actually felt sorry for him. But another part of me was simply exhausted. For weeks, every conversation had ended the same way. Someone admitted things were bad. Someone said they were sorry. And then someone told me there was nothing they could do. I was tired of hearing it. I appreciate you admitting you made a mistake, I finally said. But that doesn't change the fact that I'm the one stuck with the debt. There was silence on the other end of the phone. If you can't pay it back, I continued, then Mom and Dad need to. One way or another, someone has to take responsibility. Evan sighed. I'll talk to them. His voice didn't sound hopeful. It sounded defeated. I could tell he already knew what I knew, that our parents weren't exactly rushing to fix the situation. We ended the conversation on an awkward note. Neither of us really knew what else to say. When the call ended, I just sat there staring at my phone. Instead of feeling better, I felt even more drained. Every time I thought I was getting closer to a solution, another obstacle appeared. It felt like this nightmare just wouldn't end. The next morning, I received an email from my lawyer. It was short. Asterisk, are you ready to move forward? Asterisk, seeing those words made everything feel real. This wasn't just a family argument anymore. I was standing at a crossroads. Either my parents finally accepted responsibility, or I took them to court. Before making that decision, I sent my mom one final message. I reminded her that the deadline expired at the end of the day. I told her that if they couldn't present a real repayment plan by then, I would begin the legal process first thing the following morning. After sending the text, all I could do was wait. Hour after hour passed. My phone stayed silent. As evening approached, I slowly started accepting the reality that I was actually going to sue my own parents. It felt unreal. Never in a million years had I imagined my life ending up here. I kept thinking there had to be another way, but every opportunity I'd given them had led to another excuse. Just when I was about to lose hope completely, my phone buzzed. It was my dad. His message was brief and straight to the point. Asterisk, we've managed to gather some money. We can't pay it all at once, but we'll start paying you back in installments. Asterisk, that was it. No apology. No acknowledgement of everything they'd put me through. No explanation. Just a repayment plan. It wasn't the ending I'd hoped for. I wanted accountability. I wanted honesty. Instead, all I got was a promise to start making payments. Still, it was something. For the first time since discovering the loan, it felt like they were finally taking me seriously. I replied almost immediately. I'll accept the installment payments, I wrote, but I'll be monitoring them closely. If you miss even one payment, I'll file the lawsuit immediately. A few minutes later, my dad replied with a simple agreement. That was the entire conversation. As strange as it sounds, I finally felt like I had regained a little control over my life. The victory didn't feel satisfying. It felt bittersweet. I'd had to fight for every single step. I'd spent weeks living with constant anxiety, endless arguments, and the heartbreaking realization that the people I trusted most had betrayed me. Even if the money eventually came back, I knew things would never be the same. My relationship with my parents, and probably with Evan too, had been permanently changed. Trust like that doesn't magically come back. Even so, I didn't regret standing up for myself. For the first time in a long while, I felt like I was finally moving forward instead of constantly reacting to someone else's choices. The emotions were complicated. There was relief. There was sadness. There was anger. And, somewhere underneath all of it, there was a small sense of closure. One thing had become absolutely clear. I would never allow anyone, even my own family, to take advantage of me like that again. Whatever happened next, it would be the beginning of a new chapter, and this time I'd be protecting my future. Update 2. After my dad agreed to repay the money in monthly installments, I honestly thought the worst was finally behind me. It wasn't the perfect outcome, but at least it was progress. For the first time in weeks, I allowed myself to believe that maybe we could slowly move past everything that had happened. The first few payments arrived exactly as promised. Each deposit wasn't very large, but every payment gave me hope. I watched my loan balance begin to shrink, little by little, and it felt like I could finally breathe again. For the first time since opening that terrifying email from the bank, I started sleeping through the night. I threw myself back into work. I focused on my internship. I spent more time with friends. I even started imagining that, someday, maybe my family and I could rebuild at least part of the relationship we'd lost. Looking back, I realized I was probably fooling myself. Because, just when things finally seemed to be getting better, everything fell apart again. Without any warning, the payments stopped. There wasn't a phone call. There wasn't a text message. There wasn't even an excuse. 1 month, the payments simply never arrived. At first, I assumed there had been some kind of banking issue. I refreshed my accounts several times that day. Nothing. The next day, I checked again. Still nothing. I tried convincing myself not to panic. Maybe the transfer was delayed. Maybe there had been a technical problem. Maybe they'd send it tomorrow. Tomorrow came. Then another day. Then another. The account stayed exactly the same. A familiar feeling settled into my stomach. The same sinking feeling I'd had the day I first discovered the loan. I kept trying to give them the benefit of the doubt. They're probably just running late, I told myself. I shouldn't jump to conclusions. But as the days slowly turned into weeks, it became harder and harder to believe that this was just a delay. Deep down, I already knew what was happening. Once again, I was being forced to wonder whether my parents had ever truly intended to keep their promise at all. As the days stretched into weeks, I couldn't ignore the truth anymore. My parents weren't going to keep their promise. The installment payments had stopped, and they hadn't even bothered to explain why. They had broken their word, just like they always did. I sat in my apartment staring at my bank account, hoping maybe I'd missed something, hoping the payment would suddenly appear. It never did. In that moment, I realized I was right back where I'd started. Weeks of stress, weeks of arguments, weeks of emotional exhaustion, and after everything I'd gone through, I was still left carrying the burden. I was furious, not just angry, completely betrayed. It felt like they had never intended to follow through in the first place. They'd made a few payments just to calm me down, hoping I'd eventually relax, stop asking questions, and let the whole thing go. They couldn't have been more wrong. I picked up my phone and started typing a message to my dad. I didn't sugarcoat anything. I reminded him that they had already missed a payment and that our agreement had been very clear. I told him I wasn't willing to tolerate another broken promise. Then I gave him one final opportunity. If I don't hear from you by the end of today, I wrote, I'll be filing the lawsuit tomorrow morning. I hit send. Then I waited. The waiting was almost worse than the argument itself. I couldn't sit still. I paced around my apartment, checked my phone every few minutes, and kept hoping for some kind of response. Nothing. Hours passed without a single message. The silence made everything feel even worse. It was as if they had simply decided to ignore me, hoping I'd eventually get tired of fighting and give up. But they still didn't understand. I was finished being patient. I was finished making excuses for them. And I was definitely finished letting them take advantage of me. Late that afternoon, my phone finally buzzed. It was my mom. Before I even opened the message, I had a feeling I already knew what it would say. I was right. She apologized for missing the payment, but immediately followed it with another explanation. Things had been difficult. Money was tight. They didn't have enough right now. She asked me to give them more time. She begged me to be patient. She insisted they were doing the best they could. As I read her message, a wave of frustration washed over me. I'd heard these same promises before. Every deadline had been followed by another excuse. Every promise had turned into another delay. I couldn't keep believing words when their actions kept telling a different story. I replied immediately. This time, I didn't soften my response. I've given you more time than anyone else would have, I wrote. I've been patient. I've waited. I've trusted your promises, and every time you've broken them. I paused before typing the next sentence. If the money isn't there tomorrow, I'm filing the lawsuit. No more excuses. No more delays. I ended the message with one final thought. I'm done being treated like a doormat. After sending it, I put my phone down. The rest of the day passed in a blur. I felt angry. I felt disappointed. More than anything, I felt exhausted. It seemed like I'd been fighting this battle forever, and every time I thought I was getting somewhere, I ended up right back where I started. There were moments when I wanted to quit, moments when I wondered whether it would be easier to just accept the debt and move on with my life. But every time that thought crossed my mind, I remembered what had actually happened. I remembered opening that email from the bank. I remembered discovering that $$80000 had been taken in my name without my knowledge. I remembered every lie, every excuse, every attempt to make me feel guilty for protecting myself. No, I couldn't let it go. If I gave up now, I'd be telling myself that everything they'd done was acceptable. I refused to do that. That night, sleep was impossible. I spent hours staring at the ceiling while every conversation replayed in my head. My dad yelling at me, my mom crying, Evan admitting he had spent the money, every broken promise, every missed payment. The more I thought about it, the more I realized this hadn't started with the loan. It had been happening for years. Evan had always come first. Whenever he made a mistake, someone else cleaned it up. More often than not, that someone was me. I'd always been expected to be responsible, to work harder, to sacrifice more, to understand, to forgive. This time was different. This time, I wasn't going to carry the consequences of someone else's decisions. The next morning, I woke up feeling like I hadn't slept at all. My body was exhausted. My head was pounding. Emotionally, I felt completely drained. Still, I knew what I had to do. I got out of bed, made a cup of coffee, and sat down at my kitchen table. One by one, I gathered every document I'd spent weeks organizing. The loan agreements, the bank statements, my tuition records, emails, text messages, notes from my meetings with my lawyer. Every piece of evidence was neatly organized inside a folder. Looking at it all together made the situation feel painfully real. My case was strong. I knew that. But knowing I had evidence didn't make the decision any easier. I never wanted my life to reach this point. Just as I grabbed my keys and headed toward the door to meet my lawyer, my phone rang. It was my mom. For a second, I considered letting it go to voicemail. After everything that had happened, I didn't know if I had the emotional energy for another conversation. But something made me answer. The moment I picked up, I heard her crying. Not just tearing up. She was sobbing. Between breaths, she begged me not to file the lawsuit. She promised they'd figure something out. She said they'd find the money somehow. She pleaded with me to give them just a little more time. As I listened, I felt that familiar wave of guilt begin creeping back. Part of me still didn't want to hurt her. Part of me still wished none of this had ever happened. I didn't want to be the reason my family fell apart. But then another voice reminded me why I was standing here in the first place. I remembered every sleepless night, every panic attack, every lie, every broken promise. Every time they'd expected me to sacrifice my future so Evan wouldn't have to face the consequences of his own choices. I took a deep breath. I've already given you more chances than I should have, I said quietly. I can't keep doing this. She continued begging. She kept promising things would change. But my decision had already been made. I'm not backing down, I repeated. Again and again. Eventually, she stopped talking. A few seconds later, the line went dead. I stood there in complete silence, my phone still in my hand. For a moment, I felt like the worst person in the world. No one wants to reach a point where they are forced to choose between protecting themselves and protecting their family. But I also knew something else. If I gave in one more time, nothing would ever change. I couldn't allow myself to be pulled back into the same cycle of guilt, broken promises, and disappointment. This time, I was choosing my future, no matter how painful that choice was. I knew I had to stay strong. As painful as it was, I had to protect myself, even if it meant hurting the people I loved. That afternoon, I met with my lawyer, and together we officially started the process of filing the lawsuit. Walking into his office felt unreal. Just a few months earlier, I had been focused on graduating college, starting my internship, and planning my future. Now I was sitting across from an attorney, signing legal documents to take my own parents to court. Every signature felt heavier than the last. Part of me still hoped my parents would come to their senses before everything became official. I kept hoping they'd call at the last minute, apologize, and finally take responsibility. But deep down, I wasn't expecting a miracle anymore. Once the paperwork was filed, the news spread through the family much faster than I expected. Within days, my phone wouldn't stop ringing. I got calls from cousins, aunts, uncles, and even a few family friends. Suddenly, everyone had an opinion. Some relatives surprised me by offering support. They told me I'd done everything I could to resolve things privately and that I had every right to stand up for myself. They reminded me that protecting my future didn't make me a bad person. Hearing that meant more than they probably realized. Unfortunately, not everyone saw it that way. Several older relatives called just to tell me I was making a terrible mistake. They accused me of tearing the family apart. They said I was selfish. Some insisted that family problems should stay inside the family, no matter what had happened. Others told me I should simply forgive my parents and move on. Listening to those conversations was painful. Many of those people had known me my entire life. I had always believed they'd understand. But they didn't know the whole story. They hadn't seen the loan documents. They hadn't spent sleepless nights wondering how they were going to repay $170,000 They hadn't been lied to or manipulated. From the outside, all they saw was a son suing his parents. They never saw the years of favoritism, broken promises, and betrayal that had led me to that point. I tried not to let their opinions affect me. Some days I succeeded. Other days it felt like I was losing everything. Not just my parents, my entire support system. There were moments when I questioned whether any of this was worth it. But every time those doubts crept into my mind, I reminded myself why I'd started this fight in the first place. I deserved better. I deserved honesty. I deserved the chance to build my own future without carrying a debt created by someone else's decisions. For years, I'd been the one expected to sacrifice. This time, I chose myself, even if that meant burning bridges that could never be rebuilt. So I kept moving forward. It wasn't easy. Some days were harder than others. There were nights when I barely slept and mornings when I questioned every decision I'd made. But turning back wasn't an option anymore. I'd already come too far. This was my life, my future, and I wasn't going to let anyone take that away from me. Update 3. A few weeks passed after I officially filed the lawsuit. Without question, it was one of the hardest periods of my life. If someone had told me a year earlier that I'd be taking my own parents to court, I would have laughed. I never imagined my life would end up here. Yet somehow, this had become my reality. The family drama only grew worse after the lawsuit became public. Almost overnight, everyone picked a side. Some of my cousins reached out privately to tell me they were proud of me for standing up for myself. A few admitted they'd seen my parents favor Evan for years but had never said anything. Hearing that made me realize I hadn't imagined everything. Other relatives weren't nearly as supportive. The older generation especially seemed determined to blame me. They constantly repeated things like, "Family should always come first. You don't take family members to court. You should have handled this privately." Every conversation seemed to end with someone telling me to keep the peace. But what peace? The trust between my parents and me had already been destroyed long before any lawsuit was filed. As for Evan, he still acted as if I was the villain. Instead of acknowledging how his actions had contributed to everything, he continued acting like I was overreacting. More than once, I heard people describe me as ungrateful. That word hit harder than I expected. Apparently, some people believed I should be thankful for everything my parents had done for me, as if leaving me responsible for a $170,000 loan was somehow an act of love. The legal process itself moved painfully slowly. There were endless phone calls between attorneys, stacks of paperwork, court documents, deadlines, meetings. Everything seemed to take forever. Thankfully, my lawyer was incredible. He explained every step in plain English and made sure I understood exactly what was happening. Without him, I probably would have been completely overwhelmed. Even so, every meeting reminded me how real this situation had become. Every document I signed, Every court notice that arrived. Every conversation about evidence. Each one was another reminder that this wasn't a bad dream. This was my life. Then, about a week ago, something unexpected happened. My lawyer called me. "I've got some news," he said. My heart immediately started racing. He explained that my parents wanted to settle the case. For a few seconds, I just sat there in silence. After everything that had happened, I honestly hadn't expected them to change course. But apparently, they had finally realized I wasn't bluffing. If the lawsuit continued all the way through court, it would likely cost them far more than simply repaying the money they'd taken. Knowing my parents, I suspected another reason too. They cared deeply about appearances. The last thing they wanted was a public court case exposing everything they'd done. Still, hearing the word settlement felt like a huge weight had been lifted off my shoulders. Not because everything was suddenly fixed. Nothing could erase what had happened. But for the first time since this nightmare began, it finally felt like there might be an ending. A few days later, we all met at my lawyer's office. Walking into that conference room was incredibly uncomfortable. It was the first time I'd been in the same room with my parents since filing the lawsuit. They looked completely different. Both of them seemed exhausted. The stress had clearly taken its toll. My mom kept her eyes fixed on the table. She couldn't even look at me. My dad looked older somehow. His shoulders were slumped, and the confidence he'd shown during our earlier arguments had disappeared. For the first time in months, neither of them seemed interested in making excuses. The room was quiet, heavy, almost unbearable. No one really knew how to begin. After everything we'd been through, there weren't many words left to say. "I've rewritten your passage into a natural, emotional, human storytelling style with more detail while preserving all the important events, emotions, and meaning My dad never apologized. He just sat there looking angry. Not the kind of anger that explodes into shouting, but the quiet kind, the kind that comes from someone who can't believe they're finally being held accountable. It was obvious he still saw himself as the victim. Almost as if I was the one forcing them into this situation instead of them facing the consequences of choices they had made years earlier. The settlement meeting was tense from beginning to end. Thankfully, my lawyer handled most of the conversation. I honestly don't know if I could have stayed calm enough to negotiate without him. My parents tried to bargain. They offered less than they owed, arguing that they simply couldn't afford the full amount. My lawyer didn't budge. He calmly laid out the evidence, explained how strong our case was, and reminded them that if this went before a judge, they would likely end up paying much more, not only the money itself but also additional legal costs. The room fell silent. For the first time since this entire nightmare began, my parents had nowhere left to hide. Eventually, after hours of discussion, they agreed. They would repay the full $80,000 they had taken, along with additional money to cover part of my legal expenses. When the agreement was finally signed, everyone quietly gathered their papers. There wasn't any celebration. No one smiled. There was no sense of victory. If anything, it felt strangely empty. I had technically won. I'd fought for months to reach this point, and I'd gotten exactly what I'd asked for. So why didn't it feel good? Because the price had been enormous. The money was coming back. My family wasn't. The relationship I'd once had with my parents was gone. Trust had been replaced with paperwork. Conversations had been replaced with lawyers. And somewhere along the way, we had stopped feeling like a family altogether. One person was noticeably absent from the entire process. Evan. He never came to the meeting. He never called. He never offered to help. As far as I knew, once Mom and Dad agreed to repay the money, he considered the whole situation solved. It was almost as if none of it had ever involved him. That hurt more than I expected. When the meeting ended, everyone slowly stood up. As we walked toward the exit, my mom finally spoke. Her voice was barely above a whisper. "I'm sorry," she said. "We never wanted things to end up like this." I stopped walking. For a moment, I thought about turning around, but I couldn't. I couldn't even look at her. I'd heard the word sorry too many times. After enough broken promises, apologies start sounding like empty words. What mattered were actions, and their actions had spoken louder than anything they could say now. Without turning around, I quietly answered, It's too late for apologies. Those words hurt to say, but they were true. My dad never said a single word. He simply walked out of the office without looking back. I stood there for a while, watching both of them disappear down the hallway. A strange thought hit me. This might be the last time I ever see my parents. That realization settled heavily in my chest. How do you come back from something like this? How do you rebuild a relationship after lawsuits, betrayal, hidden debt, and months of emotional manipulation? Could you ever pretend none of it happened? I honestly didn't think so. Too many lines had been crossed. Too many wounds had been left untreated. And if I was being honest with myself, I wasn't sure I even wanted to repair the relationship anymore. Not after everything. A few days later, the settlement money arrived exactly as promised. The first thing I did was pay off the remaining balance on the student loan. Watching that final payment go through should have been one of the happiest moments of my life. After all, I was finally free. No more $170,000 hanging over my future. No more fear of spending decades paying for someone else's decisions. I was officially debt-free. But instead of feeling pure happiness, I mostly felt quiet. There was relief, of course. A huge weight had been lifted off my shoulders. But there was also an emptiness I hadn't expected. The financial burden was gone. The emotional one wasn't. I'd spent so much of my life trying to earn my parents' approval, trying to be the responsible child, trying to keep the family together. Now that chapter was over, and for the first time, I had to figure out who I was without them. Thankfully, I wasn't completely alone. My friends never stopped supporting me. They reminded me why I'd fought so hard in the first place. My girlfriend was there through every breakdown, every sleepless night, every meeting with my lawyer, and every moment when I questioned whether I was doing the right thing. I honestly don't know how I would have gotten through it without her. Even so, there was still a hole inside me. No matter how unhealthy my relationship with my parents had become, they were still my parents. Accepting that they were now simply people I used to know was one of the hardest parts of the entire experience. Life slowly began moving forward. My internship turned into a full-time position. For the first time, I was able to focus on building a career instead of constantly worrying about debt and legal battles. I started looking at apartments. I even considered moving to another city for a completely fresh start. Part of me wanted a place where nothing reminded me of everything that had happened. Still, leaving wasn't as simple as packing boxes. It felt like I was leaving behind more than a house or a neighborhood. I was leaving behind the life I thought I was going to have. Sometimes I caught myself wondering whether I'd made the right decision. Would life have been easier if I'd simply accepted the debt? If I'd kept quiet? If I'd sacrificed my future just to keep everyone happy? Those thoughts never lasted very long, because every time they appeared, I remembered the truth. I remembered opening that bank email. I remembered discovering that my own parents had borrowed $170,000 in my name. I remembered learning that $80,000 had been handed to Evan while I worked multiple jobs and earned scholarships to pay for my education. I remembered the lies, the excuses, the manipulation, the broken promises. And then I remembered why I fought. Standing up for myself wasn't easy. It wasn't satisfying. Sometimes doing the right thing doesn't feel empowering. Sometimes it just feels painful. Sometimes it simply feels necessary. That's where my life is today. I'm still rebuilding. I'm still healing. I'm still learning how to trust people again. Some days are harder than others. There are moments when I still question everything. But those moments don't last forever anymore. The biggest lesson this experience taught me wasn't about money. It wasn't about lawsuits. It wasn't even about family. It taught me that I was stronger than I ever believed. It taught me that I didn't need to keep sacrificing myself for people who refused to protect me. Most importantly, it taught me that walking away isn't always giving up. Sometimes walking away is the only way to find peace. I don't know exactly what the future holds. For the first time in a very long time, though, I'm okay with not knowing, because whatever comes next will be a life that I built for myself. Not one controlled by guilt. Not one shaped by someone else's choices. Just mine. And honestly, that might be the happiest ending I could have hoped for.